Andy. I think it's our next speaker is Dr. Futreal from MD Anderson. He's had some technical difficulties, so we're going to cross our fingers and everything's okay. But even not, you'll see him again later this afternoon, and there won't be slides, so it should be easier. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Well, let's see if we can make this work. We'll share the screen. There we go. Right. So what I'm going to cover is the D3CODE project, which you've heard a bit about this morning. And it's essentially an effort that was started back in March, and to begin to really think about what we had to do to get prepared for understanding how the pandemic, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, was going to play out in essentially what was a very, very large group of immunocompromised patients that sort of live under the roof of MD Anderson. And the reasons we were concerned were many, but part of it was from this early data. And the first data that came out of Wuhan, early data on COVID and the outcomes in cancer patients, suggests there was an extraordinarily high mortality rate, something on the order of 28% in that first small set of patients. And various other correlates of sort of time to recent chemotherapy began to emerge. And this high mortality rate actually persisted as more and more studies came online. This is a study from, on the right-hand side, of case fatality rate in New York hospital system in cancer patients in particular. You see again a 28% with the heme population being even higher. And so these data were sort of emerging, not even in published form, but in the form of preprints and bioarchives and word of mouth. And we began to sort of get concerned in March. And we also were in a position where we were literally, the weekend we began to think about this, the research workforce has essentially been sent home. And one begins to think really quickly, okay, of the people that have been sent home, who are the most capable of continuing to work in a way that they were used to with the least disruption? And one of the groups that comes to mind is obviously the informatics, data science, computational biology folks. And so we had a call that weekend in mid-March and said, look, we think a giant wave is coming. We don't understand anything about this disease in our patient population. How do we begin to at least make sure we're able to learn as much and as fast as possible from every potential patient? And the reasons for worrying about the cancer patient population are sort of summarized here. And the first and foremost is obviously the issue of immunosuppression from multiple standpoints. Cancer itself is immunosuppressive, particularly in the heme malignancies, in particular chemotherapy, obviously. And there's also the issue of immune modulators, which are being used in certain contexts. The second question, which is really an interesting one as well, is we have a proportion of patients, larger every day, that are actually treated with agents that actually activate the immune system. And so if one of the primary routes to fatality is large amounts of immune activity releasing cytokines and whatever, what happens when you then treat a patient with an agent whose fundamental role is to unblock the immune system? And more practical everyday things is frequent contact with the medical systems and recurrent therapies, a real concern about delays in therapy. What if patients stop coming? What if they delay treatment? What if we stop screening? Are we going to see upstaging and when we turn the tap back on, so to speak? Comorbidities. What about a patient who has heart disease? What about a patient who has, other modifying factors? And of course, the age of the population itself. And data was emerging already at that point that one of the risk factors for a poor outcome, being ventilated or even death, was actually increasing age. And so we had all of it going on in a very large group of patients under one roof. And so we began to put together a protocol that actually began to sort of address what we were worried about. And what you see here is, as of last week, this is sort of the shape of our COVID population over the span from essentially when we started, which was this 320 sort of interval in March for this particular project. And you can see sort of a bit of a wave and maybe a bit of a second wave or a third wave coming. But all told, we've seen 931 patients in the hospital who are positive. So not an insubstantial number, not a drastically large number, thankfully. It's not as big as we were worried about, but still, it's a substantial portion of patients that we have to have special insight into to take the best care of. And so our approach was to think about a protocol, and a protocol that would allow us to both source, aggregate, explicitly integrate, and analyze and share data from patients who were tested, symptomatic, or at increased risk for COVID, really to identify as fast as we could potential prognostic correlates, any predictive markers, and anything that correlate with outcome that we could begin to modify on the fly. This is about bending trajectories with almost sort of real-time analysis of data. Because what we want to do is better manage patients at the end of the day in the context very specific of a cancer diagnosis. And so the approach we took was an IRB-approved data protocol, which is essentially an umbrella, which allows us to aggregate all of the above sort of bits of information into a data lake architecture at an institutional scale. So the idea here is you build the umbrella, and then each investigator who may have a very specific interest in things like cardiovascular toxicity, coagulation, et cetera, does not have to go to the IRB and write their own protocol to then do exactly the same thing that the person next to them is doing with a different protocol. So it was very much about an umbrella that empowered research to go fast. And it was explicitly sort of built here to think about patient care data, obviously, mostly coming from the EHR, external medical records when the patient comes in for treatment, really thinking about non-standard data collection early in the process. What about patient-reported outcomes, symptoms? A lot of effort is going into that. But also thinking with more of the researcher hat on, can we explicitly go after tissue collection and analysis as well? Really thinking about, in tandem, using protocols which already existed, modifying those on the fly for collection of specific samples from this particular patient population. So we have the opportunity to walk back into translational analysis, even if we couldn't do them at the time. This was just about collection. And of course, the other thing, it's a pandemic, a global sort of phenomena of really sort of horrific proportions, and other groups are doing things too. So how do we think about external data? Publicly available data sets, consortia generated, government generated. How do we bring those in to this architecture? So it was very much about thinking about these four quadrants, if you will, all coming in under an umbrella, and then really begin to be prosecuted by a very large multidisciplinary team of like-minded individuals. And so one of the first things we did was, over the course of that first week, really begin to think about putting a team together, which again, I don't have all of their affiliations here, but it ranges literally across every facet of the institution. From surgery to radiology, from radiation oncology to nursing to supportive care. I mean, you pick an area, and of course our colleagues in IT and IS are all in the mix here. We set up standing meetings Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7 a.m. Everyone is there, and it's literally attended by 25 or 30 people every single time that happens. And we've missed one, and that was July 4th. In the 7 months we've been doing this. Really multidisciplinary, an incredible team of people coming together to really drive hard on a problem that needs expedited work. One of the things that allowed us to do was really think about how we leverage this as almost a crucible. It's a term I'll use for building out this idea of team data science, and Carolyn's presented on this a couple of times. But it is really thinking about, because we're trying to collect data on the fly, we have to have the observations in context. We really need to think about controlling the ontology, because we have to be able to do this in near real time to really make a difference for patients, because this thing is moving so fast. It's not like we have the luxury of waiting 5 years and then going back and sorting it all out. We have to understand that this has to be in context. We have to know where the data comes from. If it's called three different things in three different places, what is the relationship between those terms? Really move into the area of, again, dynamic assessment of quality based on the source, the context, the provenance, if you will, linking to insights to those observations. And as you do this, how do you begin to drive, collaboration within the group around a governance that makes sense? And again, we come in with an umbrella protocol whose explicit remit is actually to aggregate, share, and promote the very thing we're trying to govern. So this was a nice situation to really begin to think deeply about how do you understand and promulgate a governance model that actually facilitates and encourages collaboration and research rather than seeks to gate it and is solely obsessed with academic credit protection. How do you do both and do them well? And I think one of the telling things is, as we move through, everyone was immediately in agreement that anything that comes through that we've touched, there would be a team data science sort of authorship where D3CODE becomes an author as a team. And I think that's a nice sort of halfway house to really think about how we move forward as an institution into this particular space. There's an operating framework that we put into place, and what you'll see is an arrow going to the right and an arrow going to the left. And it really pins on relatively clean, I think, lines of thinking about the data request itself. So we've got an aggregation engine, an umbrella. What about the specific driver projects? What about the specific internal research projects? How do we think about assessing what they need? And so you get this flow from right to left to right rather, where the requests come in, they're assessed at the level of, we'll come on to a data office model where you work with the investigators to understand, okay, what is the question you're trying to ask? What are the data that you may need? Do we already have this collected? Is it flowing into this architecture already? Or are there new things we need to go get? And if so, what is the nature of where they live, how often they're generated, the usual things one thinks about, but really thinking about it as a process flow into these data management systems, which are really thinking about the provenance, the terminologies used, the ontology controls, where the data has to go, where it needs to end up in terms of being useful, be it imaging data, be it sort of molecular data, be it sort of clinical data, and really thinking about the underlying sources here. So where are all the places that these data might live, and how do we make this flow back into the front stage, if you will, which is the user interface around the research space, because this is to drive research quickly and obviate the need for all the people who come in on the right left-hand side to think, well, the only way I'm going to ever get anything is to write a very specific protocol and go try to find it. And this is hopefully trying to break the back of that particular model, saying, let the umbrella do the aggregation work. You focus on the research question, and we have explicit resource investment in terms of incredibly talented, dedicated people who will make this flow work for each and every research question. And so we thought about a lot about data governance and provenance, because the backbone of this has to be about the ability to have high quality data that is understandable, findable, repeatable, but also around how do you govern access? How do you make it useful, but also observe from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, PHI and other things that need to be thought about in terms of doing the best work you can do within the bounds of what one is allowed to do. And so we've got 3 teams that think about ontology, that think about data quality, and to think about compliance. And this is, none of these things are by accident. These are built into woven into the fabric, if you will, of what we're trying to accomplish from a data management system standpoint, all sort of born, if you will, and facilitated by trying to make the best of a bad situation, which was, understanding this virus in our cancer patients. The other thing we did more of a front stage was think about, okay, a researcher comes to this data, how will they get at what they want? How will they identify the question, define the question, really begin to think about what needs to go into driving some insight into that research question that may be incredibly specific to their expertise. And so this data office model was born, and this is led by sort of Scott and Vinod, but it is about sort of providing the human, if you will, who has subject matter expertise. Both Scott and Vinod in this particular instance are medical oncologists, for instance. So they sit and work with teams to understand the question, understand the data sources, constant communication from front to back end, front stage, backstage, to really begin to drive research projects. It also has the advantage of understanding that some requests need to go elsewhere, and that's fine, but also really strong is that 2 groups come in over 3 days and ask the same sort of question. There's institutional, or at least D3CODE memory around, well, this is already going on, and the ability to connect and not repeat it, and reuse as much as possible, I think is huge in this particular space, not only for the speed aspect, but also the efficiency aspect. Because, you see two people's names on here, it's a bigger team behind it, but it's still limited in terms of what any group of people can do in the run of a day. So what have we actually touched? So this is a slide from Scott, which just gives you a sense of the various areas that are actually working on common data that's been assembled over the course of this 7 months. And this is not just a pretty slide. This is a slide of actual work going on about very specific questions, which you'll hear some more about in a few minutes, in these various areas, ranging again from medical oncology through derm, general medicine, intensive care, endoscopy, surgery, pharmacy, radiation. All of these are driving on very specific aspects of how this infection and disease is playing out in our cancer patients and adversely affecting outcomes. And how do we mitigate those particular things? What you see here is sort of listed out again by sort of more detail about where they actually belong and where they actually live, but also a timeline. So there's a group which are well progressed to having insights and manuscripts and the other bits and pieces in the support phase where they're rolling. They have access to the data, the platforms that have been put together. We have a group that's sort of next in line. So there's this active flow again from left to right as you look at the screen, which is very much about sort of understanding in the pre-engagement phase, begin the build out and understanding what needs to get done in the active, and then really helping facilitate and speed up in the leading edge, and then letting them roll, all in the context of this single protocol, which has brought together these data for the express purpose of making this whole thing go and go quickly. So I'll leave you with a bit of a summary. Again, this is a very specific effort that was built to accelerate understanding the interplay of COVID-19 and cancer. What it has done in its build is actually build a really strong community in an intensely short period of time. I mean, I can't overemphasize how quickly this has been done to really think about how do you coordinate efforts like this, get like-minded individuals, think about these team data science approaches, which by no accident are completely appropriate for thinking about how we begin to tackle similar issues in the larger cancer patient population once we reach the shores of wherever COVID will eventually land. It may be some time, but the same principles apply to doing this kind of work at institution at large. Really asking questions about teams that can help get things done. The data management on the backstage, the data offices on the front stage. How do you think about scaling that model when you go into larger cancer-specific projects? And I think what is born out of it is really an impressive array of research projects that are really leveraging a common and growing set of high-quality data, asking questions of it in various and different ways, but also the facilitation of collaborations both within the institution and, as this particular presentation at this particular conference suggests, outside of the institution. So with that, I will say thank you very much and stop.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for that. We actually probably have time for a few questions. I was going to say, like, is there anything you would tell people not to do? Like, is there any, we did that and I'd never do that again?
I'm sure there are. I mean, to be perfectly candid, not so much in this effort. I mean, and I'm a pessimist as much as the next person, but, I have been remarkably impressed with, people's ability to move through small challenges with rapidity here. I mean, this is, again, and part of it's the pressure that was on. I mean, there was almost a universal understanding of what we were trying to do from the very beginning. We have to do something. We have to understand this problem. And I think the best example, the protocol was written in a week, from Monday to Friday. It was tweaked over a weekend. It was put into the IRB on a Monday, and it was approved on a Tuesday. That's the speed at which things happen. So, to give you a sense of the buy-in. And part of that was, as Liz Burton would say, that was the minute we thought about it, we engaged the IRB. The minute we thought about it, we engaged our colleagues in compliance. So it was never this sort of traditional model of I've got it all sorted out, let me go ask for approval. It was a team-based model of moving through these things together. And I think there are important lessons to be learned there. So my colleagues may differ entirely about things that we shouldn't have done, but I think it all went pretty well so far. I mean, given the circumstance and the urgency, I think that's the key thing. We have to do better at understanding this disease in our patients, and we have to go fast if we're going to make a difference.
you mentioned that, you guys have your regular meetings and it's been going on for 7 months. I wanted to actually point out the fact that these meetings actually happen at 7 a.m. And to me, that I was impressed because I've gotten to attend a few of them. That's pretty early. So that's dedication. Or that's early for me. I was going to say that one of the things that stood out about these meetings that I felt was a good best practice. They weren't fluff. There was always each topic was given, 10 to 15 minutes, and then you moved on. The time was used well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a group of us which I will feel fairly comfortable in saying have a real sort of allergic response to meetings for meetings' sake. Yeah. And I think we've been really, I think, proactively conscious of, this has to be worthwhile because you're taking a lot of people's time. And it's 3 hours a week, like you said, at 7 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Busy. Everyone's got a day job here. Yeah. This is above and beyond. So I think there's been a real effort to make it important and useful and really hit topics and move on, like you said. And that's a discipline that I think hopefully will continue and not sort of fritter back into we need to meet to think about the next meeting so we can plan the next meeting sort of thing, which is an easy thing to fall into, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and this is working with all of you, is if the meeting needs to be 15 minutes, it's only 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, we take, everybody, we never sit on Zoom for an hour because we can.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that encourages people. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. It was a really great talk. We will see everybody again in 15 minutes for our first set of rapid fire talks. See you guys soon.